It's a pleasure to follow my friend for Luton North. She gave an incredibly powerful speech. I also want to thank my honourable friend for Nottingham East for her incredibly powerful opening remarks and for moving this debate. She is a proud queer British South Asian who is a role model to so many, and that representation really does matter. Happy LGBT History Month. I'm here as a proud friend and ally. Stratford and Bow has a very proud history of queer resistance. It was home to the Tower Hamlets lesbian and gay campaign group when Thatcher's government introduced Section 28. When they tried to silence and erase an entire community, the campaign group fought back with defiance, holding meetings at Bromley Public Hall to spread awareness and solidarity. And while libraries across the country stopped stocking queer literature, Tower Hamlets defied this ban, even producing a gay and lesbian book list for their libraries. They also published Out East Community magazine, spreading word far and wide. And in Stratford, the East London gay community was a thriving social group. They also operated a telephone hotline every Tuesday night, taking at its peak up to 15,000 calls a year, offering help and support for gay people in East London and beyond for decades. Instead of shame, they offered solidarity, acceptance and care. These stories aren't just history, they're a legacy that has profoundly shaped our communities in East London and throughout London. And we're still home to queer celebration and resistance. Whether it's being the home of UK Black Pride at Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park, or Forest Gate Pride, who defied hatred when people defaced our local flags, and even Outswim, who meet at the Aquatic Centre to support and help local LGBT plus people participating in sports. And amazing initiatives like Positive East and Newham LGBT seniors who meet at Stratford Library. Everyone is welcome in Stratford and Bow, and we celebrate our history and heritage. But as we celebrate LGBT History Month, and as we look back on how far we've come, we cannot risk forgetting the lessons of that history. Those lessons are rarely convenient, and the risks of backsliding are ever present, as we've heard today. As I mentioned briefly, we've had our own issues in Forest Gate. We sadly saw hatred come to our own community, where our rainbow crossing, our pride flag, was shamefully defaced multiple times. It's this that reminds us we can't assume or take for granted the progress that we've made. This local crime, a hate crime, an attack on our local queer community, was awful, and it really ran through. And it wasn't just the LGBT plus community in Forest Gate. It was everyone. It was all our neighbours. We were affronted that this was happening. But we now have rainbow wraps that adorn our street lamps. And when we unveiled these, the community stood together to share a defiance message that no hate will win here. LGBT identities will never be erased, and certainly not on my watch as their MP. But as I said, Madam Deputy Speaker, we cannot risk complacency. Progress is hard fought and hard won. And in the months since the Supreme Court ruling on the Equality Act, hundreds of my constituents have written to me to share their experience and their fears, and the deep impact that the interim guidance issued by the EHRC is having on their daily lives. The lack of clarity also has an impact on organisations across the country too, and on trans people who increasingly find themselves excluded from this discussion. Just as we demand that women's voices are heard and respected, so too must we listen to trans women's voices, who find themselves subject to mockery and abuse as those on the far right stoke culture wars. But these are real people and real lives. Last year, I wrote to the Minister for Women and Equalities, and I made the views of my constituents very clear, that we must ensure that the Supreme Court ruling does not leave anyone facing yet more barriers to living a full, happy and dignified life free of discrimination and harassment. I shared stories from my constituents. One who transitioned over 25 years ago told me the place that they've worked for 13 years now has segregated toilets. They're terrified they'll now have to disclose their trans identity to their colleagues, infringing on their right to privacy and risking their safety and inclusion at work. This isn't an abstract discussion. This is real lives of real people living in every one of our communities. They deserve dignity and freedom to live as they have been, in many cases, for decades without issue. It's why we must see the new EHRC guidance come forward as soon as possible. We cannot risk backsliding by allowing this judgment to license discrimination or undermine the norms of trans inclusion. It cannot signal a move away from LGBT liberation after decades of progress. Madam Deputy Speaker, we often hear that pride is a protest, but pride is also a movement rooted in resistance, in defying silence, in refusing shame, and we've come so far. It bears repeating that the lessons of history are clear, that progress was hard-won and it must be defended. But this LGBT History Month is not just about struggle, it's about joy and celebration and celebrating queer identity. That's why I'm here as a proud ally to celebrate this. That's why Tower Hamlets Gay and Lesbian Campaign Group stood for. It's what the East London Gay Collective stood for. It's a legacy that we must all carry forward, in particular at this moment for our trans friends and neighbours. So as we celebrate LGBT+ History Month, as we look back on how far we've come, let's remember that progress is never inevitable. It demands resolve, it demands allyship, including from each and every one of us in this place.
Yeah.